Hello chess friends and welcome to the of Chess channel and welcome back to the World Chess Championship in 2021. So we're following now again the epic battle between the World Chess Champion Magnus Carlsen and his challenger Jan Nepomniachtchi. We're now in the round 6 and so far out of the first 5 games we had only 5 draws. I think real chess lovers really want to see some winning games. We want to see the beautiful elements, queen sacrifices, rook sacrifices, double attacks, decoys, deflections, pawn breakers. But so far, of course, it's a tough battle. It's the most important match for both of them, so that's why I think we can understand their choices, especially when they're playing the game with the black pieces. I think you want to get a draw, you want to get a simplified line. So as I said, it's really the most important match of their lives. The stakes are high, so I think we can understand, as I said, their choices in the middle game stage. So we're following now the game 6, in which Magnus Carlsen had the white pieces. Nepo played here with the black pieces. The symmetrical pawn structure became, I think, so far in this super event the most important element in the middle game stage in order to get a drawish position, because when we have a pawn symmetrical setup, then it's really hard to find attacking opportunities. So that's why getting a symmetry in an early stage of the game, I think, as I said, has become the most important element of this World Chess Championship, because in every game we had a symmetrical pawn structure and it was really hard for white to find attacking opportunities. Black leaned a little bit back, black slowed down the pace of the game by creating this symmetrical setup. So that's why in this game ahead again we had here a symmetrical pawn structure, which is not allowing any player here to get some kind of a attacking possibility immediately. So maybe in the later stage of the game you can make something, but immediately you cannot create really some wild attacks. So let's check out now what happened. It was a little bit different setup that Magnus Carlsen tried here, because we have again the Catalan, but in the game 2 Magnus Carlsen played, I think, a wilder Catalan opening. Then he almost lost the game. So here in this game you see sort of a pseudo Catalan setup in which Magnus Carlsen is going more positionally into the game, because he didn't want to risk so much, I think, in this game. So here d4 played by Magnus. We have knight to f6 by Nepo. We have knight to f3 by Magnus. We have now d5, and okay, you can play now the move c4, and then afterwards the move g3 and bishop to g2. Then you go into the Catalan setup. But here Magnus Carlsen delays the move c4. He's saying, I can play the move c4 whenever I like. First I'm going to play my setup. First I want to castle, secure the king, and then in the next couple of moves we'll play the move c4. So here e6 by Nepo, normal structures. First, of course, developing bishop to e7 and then castling, securing the king. So pretty normal stuff here so far. So here bishop to g2, we have bishop to e7, castling also by Nepo. And now you see an interesting choice here by Magnus. He plays now the move b3, and b3 is the preparation to play the move c4. In the last game we had this move c4 immediately, in which then Nepo simply took, and then Magnus played this wild line with queen to c2 and similar stuff. But here Magnus Carlsen is announcing a double fianchetto with the move b3, because the move b3 is also supporting the square c4. Now when we play c4, then after something like d takes c4, you can still recapture with the b pawn, and then you don't have to play this queen move, and then you have maybe these two connected pawns in the center of the board. So that's why this b3 is a little bit more passive than the immediately c4, but it's a more positional setup, as I said, here by Magnus. Now in the continuation he can also try bishop to b2, knight from b to d2, or knight to c3, and then of course also the c4 move. So pretty much standard stuff. So here in the continuation Nepo understands that Magnus wants to play really positional game, so that's why he has to open the position somewhere. He plays now the move c5. We have now d takes c5 by Magnus. After bishop to c5 we have now an interesting choice again by Magnus. We have now the move c4, which seems like a bad move in the beginning, because you risk, of course, d takes c4, and then after b takes c4 you would have this isolated pawn, which could be then a long-term weakness. But Magnus Carlsen played so far a small tactic here. After d takes c4 he has this intermezzo, queen to c2, because of course you cannot take, the bishop is hanging here on the c file. So it was, I think, a small beautiful tactic here by Magnus in the opening stage, which was sort of a surprise. We're all already here in some new territory, because here Magnus Carlsen pulled off so far a theoretical novelty, so we haven't seen so far some games in this particular line. So after move queen to c2, here queen to e7 played by Nepo, normal idea. Now he's finally threatening to play b takes c3, and he's forcing now maybe Magnus to take with the queen. If that happens, okay, you get your pawn back, but now the queen becomes actually the main issue of white. I think with b6 and then bishop to a6, the queen can be kicked away in the near future, so that's why you don't want to have your queen exposed like this. So that's why Magnus, after move queen to e7, played really an interesting line. He didn't even take with the pawn, he didn't even take with the queen, he played now the move knight to d2, challenging here Nepo further in the game, because he's saying if you want to take, let's see the possible continuation after c takes b3. This wasn't played in the game, I have to say it, but here after move b takes c takes b3, we have here this one, knight to b3. Again, Magnus gets a tempo, and after something like, I don't know, here bishop to b6 and bishop to g5, I think white is here really beautiful position. Okay, maybe black can hang into this extra pawn, but I really like maybe here the setup. You don't have to even play bishop to g5, you can play maybe a4, a5, you can still play bishop to b2, but I really like the fast development style here that Magnus Carlsen has prepared. And when we watch now the World Championship so far, in my opinion, Magnus' intention were more here to win some games. I think Magnus Carlsen risks more so far in the super event than Nepo. We have to really admit it, because Magnus was the one that always tried to sacrifice something, tried up to spice the game. In my opinion, Nepo is leaning too much back here in this super event. If Nepo finally starts to play his sharpest chess, I think he has good chances, but he has to be more active. I think here in the continuation we see that Magnus is the one that actually is trying up to spice up the game. Here it was a gambit line by Magnus, he tried now knight from b to d2, and Nepo is saying I'm not taking the pawn, I want to play now a faster development. Here Nepo played knight to c6, we have now knight to c4, and here we have b5. b5 so far it leads now into complicated line. We have seen also the move b5 in the second game played by Magnus Carlsen and Nepo, because it opens of course the long diagonal for the light square bishop, but so far this move b5 cannot be met with this idea. You cannot play knight from f to e5, you cannot challenge the knight on c5, because actually black can sacrifice the rook by playing the move knight to d4. Knight to d4 would be a brilliant move, because if you take, then of course we can take out immediately. We have knight to c2, we can take out the queen, so that's why you have to lose the tempo. That's the main issue here. After something like queen to d1, we can play now bishop to b7, we can now compete. Sorry, my screen just moved. So here after move bishop to b7, white is pretty much forced to trade off the light for bishop, and that's exactly what white doesn't want to get in these types of structures. In the Catalan, basically your light for bishop is the best piece, and now white is already in serious developing problems. Here after move queen to b7, here you have to move the knight maybe here to b2, and here after move knight to e4, we see that black is controlling now the center of the board. Now there is even this threat to play knight to c3 and then knight to e2, so that's why you would be forced to maybe even place a weird move like bishop to d2, but still with rook to d8, I think black has really a brilliant position. So that's why here, as I said, this move knight from f to e5 is not working. You cannot really create immediate threats here around on this long diagonal. So that's exactly the beauty of Nepo's preparation here against the Magnus Carlsen Catalan. So far in the second game of the World Chess Championship, we have seen also the move b5, in which Magnus tried to pull off something on this long diagonal. Didn't gain so much, I think. So it's so far, as I said, a brilliant preparation here by Nepo. But again, what we can notice here after move knight to c6, and as I said, here was the continuation b5, knight to e5, knight from c to e5 was played. Again, we have a symmetrical pawn structure. We have to really notice that, because the symmetry is really one of the most strategical drawish elements that you can get. We have again here 2 versus 2 situation, and also here a 4 versus 4 situation on the king side. So that's why you don't gain so much out of the structures. Basically what you are trying to do when you have a symmetrical pawn structure is to get a huge huge piece activity. That's the most important thing. So here in the continuation, after move knight to e5, Nepo plays knight to b4, again a good move. He gets again an extra tempo against the queen. Queen to b2 was played, and finally bishop to b7. Now Nepo has fully developed. Here he's finally competing on this long diagonal against the potential light square bishop attack. So far the position is equal. Nothing went wrong for both sides. They're playing almost the best suggested move by top engine. So really great preparation by both players. So here a3 by Magnus, kicking away this annoying knight. You don't want to tolerate, of course, your opponent's pieces on the side of on your side of the board. So that's why a3, knight to c6. We have knight to d3 attacking the bishop, and here after move bishop to b6, we have now bishop to g5 here by Magnus Carlsen. And here comes one of the critical moments, I think, of the game. So here rook to d8 was played by Nepo, and in my opinion, maybe this next move was a little bit too rushed by Magnus. He played immediately bishop to f6, and okay, bishop to f6 is creating a really weird pawn structure for black. Pawn structure is messed up in front of the king, but you don't have to play it immediately. Maybe it was time, maybe something to play something like, I don't know, rook to d1, maybe then afterwards rook to c1, because if you're getting challenged with the move h6, then of course you can still always take out the knight on f6 and create this imbalanced pawn structure. But so far you don't have to do it. You have to play, I think, a little bit around, because then afterwards you can take it out. But here Magnus take immediately. Nothing wrong also with this move, but I think it was a little bit too rushed. You don't have to do it immediately. Maybe 3, 4, 5 moves afterwards you can still do this idea. So here after move g takes f6, probably Magnus Carlsen was preparing some wild ideas like knight to f4, knight to h5, here also maybe to attack the f6 weakness. So we'll see now how Magnus here continued. He tried now rook from a to c1. We have now knight to d4. Good move by Nepo, because he has to now compete on this long diagonal. So far he wants to kick away the queen from this attack of the f6 pawn. So here in the continuation we have now knight to d4, we have bishop to d4, but now after move queen to a2, Nepo is forced now to trade off the light square bishop, and we have now reached this position in which we have a knight versus bishop middle game. And okay, again, equal position for both sides, I think. Nepo has, of course, a powerful bishop, which is attacking the f2 pawn. So far, you could have problems around the f2. Of course, Nepo has also the f6 weakness when it comes to pawn structures. Again, I'm pointing out this is a symmetrical pawn structure, so nothing special, I think, is going on. So that's why in every occasion, I think this should be, again, probably a draw. So here in the continuation, we have queen to b7 by Nepo. You don't want to play f3 actually, covering like this, because then you're making your opponent's bishop really a monster bishop, although you're getting out of the range of the bishop. But now look at this dark square, the dark square bishop will become actually the best piece on the board. So that's why here king to g1, we have queen to e4 by Nepo. We have now queen to c2, a5, we have rook to d1, and now king to g7. Maybe here f5 I like slightly more, I have to say, because after f5 you can actually change a little bit also the direction of the attack. You can place your bishop maybe here on f6, you can place it on g7, so the bishop, I think, becomes more and more flexible after potential f5. Maybe in long runs you can also try f4, because the knight would be a little bit stuck here on the square d3 in order to protect the f4 pawn breakthrough motif. So that's why here I like simply the move f5 more. You can be the judge of that. So as I said, maybe as a long run preparation to play an f4 afterwards to open and spice up the game. So here after move rook from f to d1, Nepo tried king to g7. We have now rook to d2. Here Nepo tried to simplify the game. He offers now a trade of pieces, and Magnus accepts it, because after queen to c8, rook to c8, and rook to c8, we can notice now that again the game becomes more and more equal, because here when white is playing the game with the queen, and the queen and the knight are functioning much better than a bishop and a knight. If you have played maybe several times with the queen and your knight against your opponent's queen and bishop, I think you can always find better attacking opportunities. But here in the continuation, Nepo is not allowing that scenario because especially of his weakened pawn structure in front of the king. So that's why he tried now to simplify the game. Rook to c8. Here, for instance, the evaluation is 0.0, so the engine gives no winning chances for any side. So here, after move rook takes c8, we have queen to d5 attacking the pawn. We have now b4, and here a4, which was, I think, a decent idea here by Nepo, because he didn't want to take immediately a takes b4, a takes b4, because then you see this pawn is protected by the knight. Here, after potential a5 that Nepo a4 that Nepo played, of course, still we have this weird pawn on a3, which can be, of course, attacked in the near future, maybe by the queen. So that's why Magnus has to be also careful. He's tried now e3. We have bishop to e5, and now h4. What Magnus is probably hoping for here is maybe to restrict this king's ability to escape somehow with the pawns. That would be maybe one idea, and then even try some rook batteries on the 8th rank. If that happens, of course, then the king could be endangered. But Nepo is not allowing that. First, create some breathing spaces. Although here maybe bishop to b2 is also an idea to finally get an immediate draw. I think with bishop to b2, you see you cannot take with the rook. You lose simply the knight on d3. If you take with the knight, you lose the rook. So that's why I think here it was finally a great choice here for Nepo to simplify the game by trading off some more pieces. But okay, here after move h4, Nepo tried h5, and here Magnus tried king to h2, which is also an opportunity to maybe play this kind of idea, something like rook to c2, then knight to f4, discover the attack, and then maybe to take out this pawn on h5. So really normal idea. So king to h2, also sort of an idea here by Magnus Carlsen to spice up the game further. So after king h2, actually the fun starts. We have seen this move bishop to b4 is very tempting. You want to do that, of course. You want to take out the pawn in a3. That's why I liked Nepo's setup here, b5 a4, leaving a little bit this a3 as a long-term weakness. But this move bishop to b2 is now a little bit too rushed, because here after move bishop to b2, of course, maybe a simplified line could be something like, I don't know, rook to b2 after queen takes d3. This game again should be probably a draw, because always white can go here, double up the rooks on the first rank, and maybe also protect. Rook to a2 is also an opportunity, even if you get challenged. Then with rook to c2, again probably the game should end in a draw. But after move bishop to b2, white doesn't have to go into simplified lines. White played, Magnus Carlsen played here really the best move. He played now first to move rook to c5, kicking away the queen. After move queen to d6, now Magnus actually plays a huge mistake. He plays now the move rook to d1. He was probably scared now to take here the bishop, because after queen to d3, it's not so easy again maybe to play the position anymore. But here after a move, instead of this move rook to d1, you have really, I think, a great move, rook to c2, which unfortunately Magnus Carlsen missed. He was probably scared of this idea. Bishop takes a3, but actually bishop takes a3 leads now into complicated line for Nepo, because you have this beautiful discovered attack, and even if you take here queen to b4 is not an option, because you get simply rook to d7. The problem is now you cannot get your queen back into the game. There is always this tempting tactic, of course, knight to e6, so you cannot get the queen back into the game, even if you try, I don't know, maybe something like queen to e4. You see, doubling up the rooks here is a beautiful idea, and actually white should win the game. So the evaluation is +2 for Magnus. So that's why instead of this move queen takes b4 here, after of course bishop to a3, knight to f4, black needs to retreat immediately to f8. But now again the game becomes complicated. Rook to c7, again with the same tactic. Knight to e6 is a serious threat, so that's why king to g8 would be a forced line. But now after rook to c2, of course we're trapping also here rook to c8 to trap the queen. So now queen to b4, and now after check maybe here knight to h5, here's a continuation after king to h7, here doubling up the rooks is also now an opportunity, attacking also the 7th rank. And now after king to g6, here the engine hopes for a draw for both sides. So the evaluation here is 0.0 for both sides. So it's really hard to see everything. This was maybe Magnus Carlsen opportunity to get a drawish line, but unfortunately he played now the move rook to d1, and now Nepo finally takes. Bishop takes a3. You see now this is a really bad position for Magnus. Also now the b4 pawn is hanging. In the continuation we have rook takes b5. Now here queen to d7, and after rook to c5, now again here Nepo plays e5, although you can actually, I think, even immediately take out the move bishop with the move bishop takes b4. I'm not sure why Nepo didn't take out immediately the pawn on b4. This was his plan in the beginning. He finally has the opportunity to go maybe into simplified endgame sort of. I think he should have taken the pawn, because now it would lead again into a complicated game for white. White needs to retreat. Here Magnus would probably have to play the move rook to c1, so Nepo didn't play the move bishop takes b4. So after move rook to c1, we have now bishop to a5 as an opportunity, or bishop to e7 is also an opportunity, because this discovered attack knight to f4 is not bringing so much anymore, because after queen to b5 everything is glued together. We can now protect the position, and black has now passed pawn, which is very annoying to handle. In the near future I think we can expect maybe again some ideas, bishop to b4, bishop to e7, and then push the pawn further to a3. So I think Nepo missed here. Instead of this move e5, he should have probably taken immediately bishop takes b4, but okay, still nothing wrong here in the continuation. After move e5, here Magnus has to play, I think, the move e4, which again leads into complicated line for both sides. I have to also say here that both players had not so many time on the clock. Magnus was around 2 minutes, Nepo had 3 or 4 minutes on the clock. We know that both of these players will get an extra hour when they reach their 40th move. So we're now for instance here in the move 36. So you see this was very annoying maybe to play the game like this under the time pressure. So here in the continuation, after more potential e4, queen to d4, but now maybe with this idea of rook to a5, maybe Magnus can simplify the game and hope for a draw. But he played now again a weird move, rook to c2, which gives now again Nepo simply the opportunity to take. Bishop takes b4, and again Nepo doesn't take the pawn. I'm not sure why here after move bishop to b4 Magnus would be probably again forced to play the move rook to c1, again getting an extra tempo, losing basically an extra tempo here. After move bishop to a3, again here queen to g4, very annoying move here to handle here counter attack against this rook on d1. So as I said, here the evaluation is already +2 for black, which is really wild when you think about it harder. But after move rook to c2, Nepo plays now a huge mistake. He plays now the move queen to d5, really unnecessary. He has to take, I think, the pawn and go into favorable endgame. But okay, here after move queen to d5, he missed his chance. Magnus finally regroups. He connects finally the rooks. You see how the rook connection is very important in the stage in the chess game, because when your rooks are loose on the board, then you have attacking opportunities. Here after move rook to d2, now finally Magnus has regrouped, and the engine likes again the position for both sides. Again, this is a drawish position. Okay, here queen to b3 played by Nepo. We have rook to a2, and now e4 played by Nepo. Again, a very unnecessary move to exploit yourself like this, because now the e4 is a weak pawn. I think you realize it, because you don't have to touch anything here. Basically you should accept the draw. You should realize, okay, I made a mistake. But that's actually also the psychology in chess. When you had maybe a winning position or a much better position like Nepo did here, then you want to still win the game. You're saying to yourself, okay, I had the opportunity, but I don't want to lose this game because I was so much better in the position. So now after move e4, he actually gives Magnus Carlsen the opportunity to have, I think, even a better position, because here after move knight to c5, you see this pawn becomes now the main issue. And here Nepo takes, but now Magnus again takes immediately. Knight to e4 is not the best of moves. Here you can play rook to c2. Rook to c2 is much better, because now in a potential continuation, if you want to connect your pawn, then you can play this one, knight to a4. This is a tactic that Magnus Carlsen missed, and I really wanted to point you out again that both of these players were so low on the clock. So here after knight to a4, of course Nepo can take, but now it's only temporarily sacrificed, because after rook to c3 in the near future, of course Nepo will also lose the bishop in the continuation after something, I don't know, queen to d7. You see we can play this one, and now Magnus is the one that can actually, sorry, again my screen moved. Magnus is actually the one that has the opportunity to attack the position, because these are two weak pawns. Now building up a battery on the 5th rank would be, I think, a huge opportunity here for Magnus. But unfortunately he played knight to e4. We have to understand now every move, because as I said, the time pressure was so much present here in this particular game. Now we're in the move 40. Now, as I said, both players get an extra hour. So here in the continuation, queen to b3, the rook to c2. Played by Magnus. We have bishop to f8, knight to c5. You don't want to again take bishop takes c5 after rook to c5. The game becomes more and more simplified, and the problem is now when white is always building a battery, maybe here on the first file, on the first on the a file, pardon me. Then of course you lose probably the pawn in the near future, and I'm not seeing a good way how black can attack the position, because you have only the queen on the board, so you don't have a supportive piece that could help out the queen in order to attack maybe the f2 weakness. That's the only weakness that maybe white can have in the near future, but you still see this pawn is protected. The king can also protect the pawn, so as I said, the queen wouldn't have any support in this types of continuation. So here, after move knight to c5, Nepo realizes that he has to stay active with the pieces on the board. Here, after move queen to b5, I think I would always love to play more this position from white's perspective, because I think black can make many mistakes. The only thing that white needs to do is fix the knight here around the square d4, so the knight is then fixed by a pawn. It's not so loose on the board, and you're waiting this pawn to come, because you still have this battery on the 2nd rank, and there's nothing that black can do. Black cannot advance the pawn. That's the main issue. So that's why when I watched now this position, I think black is the one that can only make mistakes. So that's, I think, something that we have to also understand in this particular position. So that's why it's much easier here for Magnus to play the endgame. So here knight to d3. Unfortunately for Nepo, as I said, he had his chances in the game, missed them. Now it's actually Magnus that is now attacking in the game. So here a3, we have knight to f4. You see Magnus found a different square to fix the knight, but still with opportunities to reroute the knight with knight to e2 and then knight to d4. Nothing can happen here. You don't have any support in order to push the pawn on a2, so it's not a possible move for black. So queen to a5, we have rook to a2, bishop to b4, rook to d3, attacking finally now this pawn, king to h6, rook to d1, we have rook to a1, we have bishop to d6, and now king to g1. Here Magnus realized a great maybe tactic for Nepo, because if you play knight to e2 early in order to maybe attack further, then you risked always this one, queen to h4. You see you couldn't take, because the bishop on d6 was really a tricky move here by Nepo. So that's why Magnus, after move bishop to d6, realized that this potential tactic moved the king simply out of the potential range of the bishop. Beautiful move by the world champ, but also great tempting tactic here by Nepo. Really wild stuff. So here from move king to g1, queen to b3, we have now finally this great maneuver of the knight. The knight is coming now into the game. Knight to e2, queen to d3, knight to d4, and now king to h7. We have king to h2, and now queen to e4. This is now also a very critical moment of this game. Queen to e4 leads now into such a wild line, which I think gives again a slightly advantage here for white. And again, if you put maybe this position into maybe a stockfish engine, it will show you that it's 0.0 for both sides. So this should be probably a drawish endgame. But as I said, I really love now more white position because of the possibility to get a draw whenever you like. So the white can always get a draw by playing this move rook takes a3 after bishop takes a3. Here rook takes a3 is of course a possibility, and actually in this position white is much better. So that's why it's not so easy even now for black to play the game, because still the only weak pawn that we have to protect here from white perspective is the pawn on f2. But you cannot again attack this pawn further because you don't have any support. Now in the near future, rook to a5, rook to h5 can happen. This is a weak pawn, this is a weak pawn. With the combination of the knight and the rook, this is a favorable endgame for white. So that's why, as I said, although the engine gives you equal chances for both sides, I would always love to play more this endgame from white's perspective. And that's exactly what happened. Rook takes a3 allows allows now Nepo to go into this tactic that we have seen before, queen to h4. So Nepo gets also his pawn back, but now after king to g1, queen to e4, we have rook to a4 here by Magnus Carlsen, getting out of the range of the bishop. We have bishop to e4, and now knight to e2. We have queen to c2, and now rook to a2. You see, nothing dramatically can happen, I think, here for white. White is always really pleasant here with the pieces, because you can always glue them together, you can always protect your pieces. Here after move rook to a2, we have now queen to b3 here by Nepo, and now king to g2, improving also the position of the king. So here queen to d5, and Magnus played maybe here also slightly inaccuracy. He played now the move f3. Maybe it was really unnecessary to weaken the pawn structure like this. Still, you can play king to king to h2 or something. You can maybe get out of the range without messing up the pawn structure further. As I said, he played now maybe a slightly inaccurate move, but again, we have to say now in the move 59, again, after move 60, both players will get additional time. We have to also say that Magnus was also low on clock here, so maybe he was a little bit inaccurate here with the move after, because of, again, a new time pressure. That's the beauty of this World Championship match. You can get many times under time pressure. So far, really brilliant game by both players. So after move f3, here queen to d1 played by Nepo, and now f4 by Magnus Carlsen. He's getting his extra tempo against the bishop, but still, you see, whenever you push the pawn, maybe with the near future with the move f5, the pawn structure can be further blocked out. So that's why f4 was maybe also a little bit too rushed move. Maybe knight to f4 would be slightly more accurate. But okay, here Magnus played f4 and simply kicked away Nepo's bishop. So after f4, here Nepo retreated to c7. Magnus Carlsen, of course, plays king to f2. Very important move to really keep everything glued together. Again, the king is protecting these two pawns. The knight is really great here on e2, because the knight is actually the best defensive piece in front of the king when the queen is attacking you. So you see, when the knight is there are not so many good squares with which here black can attack white's king. So that's why when you're playing maybe an endgame or something, it's very important to keep your knight close to your king, though, so the king is pretty much safe here. So that gives, I think, here Magnus Carlsen a little bit the opportunity to play free with this rook. So here in the continuation, we have a bishop to b6. The Nepo is targeting, of course, the main weakness now in Magnus Carlsen's position. It's, of course, the weak backward pawn on e3. So here we have here rook to a1, queen to b3. We have rook to e4. Here Magnus Carlsen, I think, found really a great method how to include the rook into the game, but also protect the e3 weakness, because that's something I think you should do. Now the threat is, of course, rook to e8 and doubling up the rook on the e file on the 8th rank, of course, and still you have this great protection of the e3 pawn. Here in the continuation, Nepo tried king to g7. We have rook to e8. We have now f5. This move is also important, very important move here by Nepo. f5, never ever allow maybe Magnus Carlsen, not immediately, but in long terms, to advance the pawn on e4, because if that happens, then of course white could have a great space advantage. Now the move f5 is basically paralyzing here the potential pawn move of white, and there is now, I think, not so many opportunities here for Magnus Carlsen to win the game. I think with the move f5, Nepo is saying, I'm really satisfied now with the draw, because I had my winning chances, I missed them. Now with the move f5, I want to slow down the pace of the game and, of course, equalize the game. So here rook from the first rank to a8, very important move here by Magnus. Now queen to b4, we have rook to c8, and now bishop to a5. The problem, I think, always for Nepo is connect the queen with the bishop, because the bishop could be sometimes loose on the board. There is always maybe even the threat, of course, to pin the bishop, then doubling up the rooks and maybe take out the bishop. So that's why here Nepo's moves are very understandable. Rook to c1, we have bishop to b6, we have rook to e5 here by Magnus, attacking now the weak f5 pawn. You have advanced the pawn, but it becomes now also a weakness in the continuation. We have queen to b3, we have rook to e8, we have queen to d5, and now rook to c8, again doubling up the rooks. But again, we should notice that Magnus still has this e3 weakness. It's something I think that bothers him now through the whole game. So here queen to h1, Nepo goes behind the king. We have rook to c1, attacking here the queen. You could maybe try something like queen to h3, but the queen is a little bit now far away from the action. You can maybe try some checks, but now with rook to b8, again, we could kick away the bishop and again maybe include this rook into the game. So it's not so easy, as I said, just to attack Magnus Carlsen here only with the queen. So that's why Nepo again realized I should basically battle for a draw. I should not complicate things. Now, out of this game, a draw would be perfectly fine. So rook to b1 attacking the bishop. We have bishop to a7. Here, Magnus Carlsen realized now a great tactical possibility, because we can notice now that the bishop is on the same rank where already the king is. So it gives here maybe white the opportunity to attack the 7th rank. So that's why here Magnus Carlsen attacked the pawn immediately. Here we have bishop to c5. We have now rook to e5 by Magnus, again queen to d3, again rook to b7, and now after a move queen to c2, here Magnus Carlsen attack again the bishop. So the bishop is hanging. The problem is now after bishop to a7, again rook to a5 attacking the bishop. That's what I meant. It's really hard for Nepo to connect the bishop with the queen. The bishop is a little bit loose on the board. Of course, Nepo wants to play free with the queen, but the bishop becomes the main issue. It becomes the basic attacking piece here for white. White is gaining every tempo here by just attacking the bishop. We have bishop to b6. Again, Magnus Carlsen attacks the bishop. We have bishop to a7, rook to f5. And here the game becomes really wild, because here after rook to f5, we can notice now that after queen to d3, again, this is now the main weakness. But now Magnus Carlsen uses this moment and attacks the 7th rank, plays a brilliant move. I think that's the only move that has here some kind of a winning chance for Magnus Carlsen, because after rook to f7, you decoying the king to, of course, to f7, but now with a check, we can reach this position. And as I said, there is no way that black will win this game, because the knight, as we said, is a great protective piece in front of the king. No checks are possible here for Nepo. What we want to do is maybe sort of a setup. Get the rook here, maybe get the rook behind the pawn and just start to push maybe this pass pawn on the e file, maybe also on the f file if the position holds. But as I said, the knight is now a great defensive piece. Again, the engine gives here equal chances for both sides. So probably if Stockfish would play now maybe the endgame against Magnus Carlsen, this could be a draw. But from a human's perspective, I think this is such a beautiful endgame to play for Magnus, because we know how tough he is in an endgame. So now I think it's very easy for white to find out the best next move. On the other hand, it's very hard for Nepo to find the best next move. So here Magnus Carlsen, we have to say, is almost was under 1 minute on the clock, so he found this brilliant tactics in a really fast way. Now here Nepo was also low on the clock, so it was now really one of the most brilliant endgames that we have witnessed in World Championship history. Really brilliant game so far. So after rook to a7, we have queen to d5, now rook to a6, king to h7, rook to a1, we have now king to g6, and now knight to d4. This is actually even the best suggested move by the end of knight to d4, centralizing the knight. What we want to do is, of course, somehow get maybe the rook here on the e1, e2, and then start finally to push this pawn, knight to f3 maybe again, and just marching with the pawn. So here in the continuation, queen to b7 was played by Nepo. Very tricky move, of course, with the idea to play queen to b2. You can play now rook to a2. You can play also rook to c1 with ideas to cover with rook to c2. But here Magnus Carlsen decided to play rook to a2, and he wants to finally bring maybe his rook here behind the pawn and start to push and advance maybe here in this very cool endgame. So okay, after rook to a2, queen h1 was played by Nepo, which is also a logical idea to simply go with the queen behind the king and just try always to do perpetuals, because in order to make something happen, I think you have to also in near future include your king into the attack in order to push the pawn. So it's just, I think, no, it's just not enough to play with the knight and the rook. So we'll see now. So here in the continuation, rook to a6, king to f7, we have knight to f3, and you see now how beautiful the knight is in front of the king. There are no, I don't know, queen to a2 ideas, so that's why I meant that the knight is the best defensive piece when your opponent is playing with the queen. We have queen to b1, we have rook to d6, and now here king to g7, rook to d5, queen to a2, and now rook to d1, of course protecting the king on the second rank, again with ideas maybe to finally go with the rook behind the pawn and just start to make progress. So queen to b1, we have rook to e2, we have queen to b6, rook to c2, again some perpetuals, and now again knight to d4, again this idea to glue the pieces together. But again you see queen to h1, again Nepo finds, I think, this brilliant defensive idea, some just to go with the queen behind the pawn. So here Magnus, you know how Magnus loves to play the endgame. I think this is a typical Magnus Carlsen endgame where he has a slightly advantage maybe, and Nepo is the one that has, I think, to play the most brilliant moves in order to make something happen. So as I said also in the middle of this game, these moves that Nepo has to find, I think, are much harder than this natural moves that Magnus is making. So here king to f6, rook to c6, we have king to f7, knight to f3, we have queen to b1, and now knight to g5, which was a slight inaccuracy now by Magnus Carlsen. He should have probably gone again with this idea to finally maybe bring somehow the rook on the e-file and start to make progress. Here the best move for black is to go with the king in the center. It's very important to play with your king towards the center instead of going on this other side of the board like Nepo did with king to g7, because actually with here with king to e7, first of all, what we can notice, there is only one check maybe with the rook, but if that happens, of course, then the rook is too far away from white king, and you want to have your king in the center of the board because we can expect in the near future that white will simply push the pawn, and you want to have your king like this there. So okay, but here king to g7 gives Magnus Carlsen again the opportunity to play this very annoying check, and again the cemented knight on d4. Now again you see this check on the second rank wouldn't be possible because then rook to c2, and again Nepo plays king to queen to h1, we have rook to c7, king to f6, knight to f3, and here after king to d7 we have queen to b2, rook to d2, and finally Magnus hoped here for the best because he maneuvered simply the pieces with knight to e2. Here we have again queen to b1, and finally now you see the move e4 by Magnus. This is now very important. I think this move e4, again, if you put this position into an engine, it will give you 0.0 chances for both sides, but it's so unpleasant, I think, to play the game here from black's perspective. These are very annoying pawns. You see they're supported with the rook, the knight is coming into the game. The only mobile pawn that you have here is maybe the h4 pawn. You can maybe split the pawn chain with the g takes h4, but actually white will still have these two connected pawns in the center of the board. So that's why again Nepo goes for his drawing chances with the move queen to h1. Maybe queen to b6 is also an opportunity to paralyze a little bit further the pieces, but okay, queen to h1, we have rook to d7, a check, we have rook to d4, and again this idea by Nepo, we have queen to h2, queen to e3, and now h4. We have to split the pawn chain because it was very annoying to handle these three connected pawns. Now at least one positional problem solved here by Nepo. We have g takes h4. You don't want to of course pass through because then Nepo has also passer, which is now then a completely winning endgame then for black. So that's why after g takes h4 we have first check, here queen to d2, and now queen to h4. Here Magnus sends again some blood, I think. Again, I'm pointing out there is always this evaluation bar. You can also check out here on the right side of the board. The position is equal, but I really would not love to play this endgame from black. Black cannot win anymore this endgame. Black can only, I think, hope for the best. Even if, I don't know, maybe Magnus has here knight and rook without even these two pawns, still is a draw. Maybe even in some occasions, if you have a knight and two pawns, still this would be a draw. So that's why, as I said, black is the only side that can make a mistake here. King to f8, we have here finally this maneuver of the king. We want to support the pawn and start to push the pawns. We have knight to g3, again a check. We have king to f3, queen to d1, king to e2, and here after queen to b3 and king to g2, it was, I think, in this particular moment that it became the world's longest World Chess Champion game in chess history in move 124. I think we have now a new world record here after move king to g2, after move 124. Here queen to b7 was played by Nepo, and we have now rook to d2, queen to b3, rook to d5. Again, you see finally Nepo realizes his inaccuracies before e4. He played now king to e7. The king is now towards the center, is at least playing now a very defensive role here. Is not allowing this pawns to get advanced. So here rook to e5, king to f7, rook to f5, king to e8, and now finally Magnus is making progress. This is really brilliant move. Here in the continuation we have queen to a2 played by Magnus Carlsen. Even if you play queen to c2, then king to h3 solves all of the positional problems. You see the knight is glued together with the rooks. Now we could even search here some path for the king. Now it will be a very unpleasant game for Nepo. So here Magnus advanced the pawn. Magnus is going closer and closer. Really brilliant endgame. We have queen to a2, king to h3, and now comes, I think, a huge inaccuracy here by Nepo. He has to play, I think, queen to b1 or queen to c2. These two moves are basically the same. The most important thing about these moves is that you're not allowing your opponent to play the move knight to h5. That's now huge thing that Nepo unfortunately didn't realize. And I really want to say that again, both players had not so many time on the clock. They were jumping around 3 minutes, 2 minutes, so it wasn't easy to play the endgame. Now after move king to h3, here Nepo has to play queen to c2 or queen to b1, but unfortunately he played here the move queen to e6, which gives now Magnus Carlsen again the opportunity to play here king to h4. So he's getting with the king closer, and you see now, okay, you have your fun with pawn check, but now the knight is coming even closer. That's the main issue. You see the knights are the pieces are getting now very active here by Magnus Carlsen. So here in the continuation of the game, queen to h7 was played by Nepo, and now, believe me or not, the evaluation is already +4 for Magnus Carlsen. So there are of course always the threats of knight to f6. This is not possible immediately, but what you can do is just simply to push the pawn. So now again Magnus has now completely winning endgame because Nepo played really this tiny little inaccuracy. He didn't compete on this long diagonal. Unfortunately, he played a different route. So for queen to a7, that's exactly what Magnus played. Magnus played move e6. Now he's advancing. As I said, there is always this threat of a fork. The only way to prolong the game is to play something like queen to a7, queen to b7, getting the queen far away from the action, but that allows again Magnus Carlsen to improve the position of the king. You have to always, this worries then to I don't know, to risk some king to g6 and then knight to g7 ideas, then again advancing the pawn. So I think this is now, as I said, a completely winning endgame here for Magnus. So that's why after move e6 here, queen to g6 was played, which is even worse. Now Magnus found a brilliant tactic. He found now the move rook to f7, because if you play queen to e6, then you get knight to g7. You can of course take, but now after here knight to e6, you have this one, and Magnus with the move king to g5, this would be then completely winning, because you can do this do the endgame like this. But now after king to f5, you're going into this parallel setup. You're going into no position. Now whatever black does, we're going simply this way, and this would be completely winning endgame. So Magnus found really some great tactics here. After move rook to f7, here king to d8 was played by Nepo, but now here f5, again a brilliant move, kicking away the queen, and now with knight to g7, the game is over. Nothing can be done. You can do some checks, but e7 and e8 you can never prevent. So in this position, believe me or not, Nepo resigned. Really wild stuff. What the hell was this? Unbelievable game. Brilliant endgame technique by Magnus Carlsen. Really, I knew when he had this rook, knight, and 2 pawns against the queen that he'll squeeze something out of this game. Really, Nepo had his chances. He missed this middle game tactic. Unfortunately for him, really, if it would be maybe a winning game by Nepo, I don't know, it wouldn't be really undeserved, but this is really brilliant how Magnus plays the endgame, and Magnus has now huge lead. Now it's actually Nepo that has now to win some games, and we have seen how Magnus plays the game with the black pieces. This will be an incredible World Chess Championship. So, what to say? Incredible game. We have seen a world record, a new longest World Championship match game in chess history between Nepo and Magnus Carlsen. So in 136 move, Nepo resigned. Brilliant game. Congratulations to Magnus, but this game could have gone also in a different direction. Brilliant also opening preparations again by Jan Nepomniachtchi. So really great stuff. I hope that you enjoyed the game. I really enjoyed it a lot because it had every element that we want to see in an endgame. We have seen a brilliant middle game tactic also by Nepo, but unfortunately, as I said, he missed some opportunities. So I'm not sure what to say anymore. I'm really also a little bit excited because this is not what I've expected about this game. In one particular moment, it seemed to me that Magnus is losing this game for sure. So, okay, I hope that you enjoyed the game. I really enjoyed it a lot. If you want to see some other games from the Super event, check out my coverage so far. And if you want to see some best chess games in chess history with some other records also in chess with some brilliant tactics in chess history, check out my commented chess games, the best chess games of all time series. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.